Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani, and it is Sunday night, as you can always tell, because I'm in my pajamas, and Succession. Shall we start with Bitey and work our way backwards? Got to start somewhere. So I'd like to start in the middle. Bitey. It's like, oh my goodness. So there's like a name for when two narcissistic people get into a relationship and have to inflict pain on each other. I have to say, as metaphors go, that was a really good one. And so I get that question a lot. What happens when two narcissistic people get into a relationship? It's an eternal love bomb, devalue, discard, hoover, like, but it's happening every 5 minutes. It's a relationship so almost steeped in a sadism. And the more they mistreat each other psychologically, the more it almost seems to work. I worry for their child. Let's just put it that way. Then let's take it to the top. Oh, seeing Logan, I got to tell you, seeing some of that old school malignant narcissism, it did a girl good. Like it's gotten a little subtle for me in the narcissism world. So a little bit of Logan went a really long way for me. Loved seeing him again. So pure, so clean. It's fascinating to watch. Shiv is such a triangulator. She's so good at it. And now she's, of course, bringing Lucas into the fold. She's a constant validation seeker. And she's interesting. Again, she's the most like her old man. And, and I think that Shiv needs so much validation. And listen, there might be some shifts for her too. She's pregnant. She's not open about it, all of that. But it's also it creates this constant triangular structure for her. Now we're seeing with Tom. I once had a video a long time ago that says basically, relationships and sex with narcissists are always threesomes because there's always someone they're triangulating you about, one of their exes, someone they saw, someone they're flirting with. So you're seeing that dynamic play out here. There were some really interesting one-liners on this episode that I really like. Again, whoever is their writer's room is better at narcissism than I am. That's for sure. I loved when they talked about, Mattson is a we're okay with geniuses acting weird in reference to Mattson. I thought that was, again, that great point of the cult of genius. And if the genius is a narcissist, it's okay. I also love the very cynical line, which I thought was so wise when we think about narcissists in business, is that his reputation is priced in. When you're someone who is as sloppy and malevolent and nasty as Mattson is, the idea of someone's reputation priced in, I'd never heard that usage. I really, really like that. It's interesting to watch with the siblings now. We've got Roman and Kendall and Shiv. Roman is such an interesting one. You'll see these sort of malignant moments pop out of him, but that's not him. He still has this very childlike fantasy of the family, of the siblings, of all of that. And in his defensive structure is to lash out at people. We'll talk about Roman firing everyone in a minute. But Kendall, not so much. I mean, when he turns to Shiv and when she was kind of kept out of the conversation and Kendall says, we were protecting you, there almost felt like there were two things happening there. At some level, Roman probably believed they were, but Kendall, totally, that was for him. He wants to be the guy. He wants to be in charge. This has always been about him vindicating himself against his father. And it is fascinating watching them, listening to this video, the at the top of the show, the Logan video, listening to their father's voice. It's this strange kind of motivator for them. And we see this again in narcissistic families all the time. But it's fascinating how it's almost a burr under the saddle that gets them going, that gets them galloping faster. But this idea that he was protecting Shiv, major gaslight from Kendall. Kendall's grandiosity is now being sort of put back together here. Back to, Kendall in his sort of bro statements, like, yeah, you gotta up our velocity, man. Like he says these ridiculous things, and that kind of Kendall bro thing is his grandiosity sort of starting to settle in. But Roman, to me, I almost felt like this was a little Easter egg in the episode that was just for me. Then when Roman says, I'm going to love bomb that stuck up B word. And I was like, thank you, Roman, for that. Thank you. Thank you for recognizing that dynamic. But in fact, Roman did not actually love bomb that woman. That was named her. I'm sorry, turning my page. In fact, Roman did not love bomb that woman named Joy. Quite the contrary. So he thought he was going to, Poor Roman is not very good at love bombing. But now Roman goes on this sort of dysregulated firing funk, firing that woman who was in charge of their, in terms of their movie division or Waystar in Los Angeles. And then we see him firing Jerry. Now, the firing of Jerry is fascinating. Jerry and his father actually represent his parents to him, right? He clearly has some edible stuff that I don't know that he's ever going to work out. That all came out with dick pics and Jerry from long ago. But with his father gone, Jerry is the person he now needs that parental validation from. He turns around and he says, I need you to believe I am as good as my dad. So if ever this sort of seeking of that parental validation is such a driver for Roman, and very, very common in somebody who has that more vulnerable narcissistic pattern. But while Roman is sort of still steeped in his vulnerable narcissism and that really impulsive firing, that's very consistent with vulnerable narcissism. So when we see the vulnerable narcissist gets a little bit of perceived power, but is still so aggrieved and angry at the world, they will lash out in these ways and can often be quite costly for a company. Now, listen. Roman has not processed his grief. The end of the episode shows that very clearly. We see it in some ways in this strange way. All these things that Roman is doing feels like he's paying homage to his dead father, that he still is so trauma bonded that it's almost like he is trying to pull his big boy pants on. And we're seeing that theme with Roman, who is by far struggling the most with grief, has these moments of lucidity, clearly wants this, maintains this sort of fantasy of the family, whereas Shiv and Kendall are much more made to play this game of hardball. Shiv has what we call the cuckold fantasy, right? Of watching your partner flirt with someone else, the idea that they'd have sex with someone else, and that this is somehow humiliating or shaming. And again, it was what I was going back to when talking about Tom and Shiv and the two narcissists and the volatility and the sadism and the bitey of it all. But that fantasy is one she's had with Tom, and this idea that Tom could actually be something that she views as almost, the meaner Tom gets, the more she would love him. So when he has his moments, she really sort of turns into him. And now with sort of this Mattson kind of in her back pocket, but not really, I think it's kind of giving her some juice. And on top of that, she's pregnant and it's all very complicated. But they're all in their own way. They're trying to be their father, which is fascinating to watch, that their process of grief now has really magnified that need to emulate this narcissistic father, who is still very much larger. When Kendall goes on that stage and you have his father literally still talking to him, was such a powerful image. To me, it was the voice of the narcissistic parent that never, ever, ever goes away, and literally almost feels as though it's very much still in the room. But you can see that Roman, let's going back to Roman again, because Roman is the money shot in this season. I have to say, he is, like, first of all, Kieran Culkin, amazing, but it's Roman's character is actually showing the greatest depth and richness. And you can see as he goes on this angry, emulate my dad, I'll show people what I'm made of. But Roman then has this sort of twitchiness when he does these things that don't feel good. They don't fit. Roman is, again, that vulnerable narcissist who is a little bit more anxious. You can see how he gets more comfortable. Kendall's not even wanting to do these big plays, but they're all pretty dysregulated. Kendall wanting to sort of say double the value on this, whatever this sort of strange live forever housing complex that they're trying to make. And they're all getting too dysregulated. The one thing Logan was that he would be dysregulated when he's scream, F off at everybody. But he seemed to be much more in command around business stuff. But I'm about to be proven kind of wrong. It did feel like everyone is sort of falling apart. This, by the way, folks, is what happens when you don't process your grief on time, because I think that they didn't get to. Mattson almost interfered with their grief process, pulls them into this deal making. But this has never been a family that's been on top of their emotions anyhow. But definitely that lack of processed grief around such a complicated figure in their lives is very, very messy for them. The flight jacket, I mean, Kendall, seriously, with the grandiosity, they're in each of them, you could see the little kid they are. Roman in particular, but even Kendall in the flight jacket and the patches, felt like a child putting on a costume. And to this day, even when Shiv was using the example of how her brothers threw her sort of under the bus. She was using examples of chocolate milk spilling in the car. The child in them is always kind of still very, very close, very, very close to the surface. But the whole, let's talk about that. What was it called? Living Prime, Living Prime Plus, or whatever that was. It was like a strange housing complex for really, really rich people who get to live forever and be safe forever. If ever there was a metaphor for grandiosity, it's there. And that this was what Kendall was pitching. What was fascinating to me was you could almost see it in real time. Kendall, because again, he was popping between the vulnerability and the grandiosity. As long as Kendall's father was alive, he was going to be grounded. It was like, again, sandbags on a hot air balloon. There was no way he was going to launch. And so he makes the grandiose play, saying there's going to be double this profit. And he's really trying to muscle out Mattson and make that deal better, or the way he wants it. He wants to be the CEO, the one CEO to rule them all. But when he gets up there and he starts finding his pace, it was fascinating to watch Kendall kind of come into his own. Kendall's grandiosity will be his undoing. There's no two ways about it. It always is. But it was fascinating to watch Kendall actually do it and get that credit for it. For Kendall, this is going to be a very interesting process, because what could have been healing for him. And I did find it interesting, that very last scene when we see Kendall go into the ocean. To me, the ocean is very womb-like. It's a rebirth for him. It's actually getting a second chance, but he is going to screw it up because he hasn't worked through his narcissism or his grief. And Roman, in his trauma bonded way, poor guy, remains very steeped in his grief, though I would never, ever want to be on the wrong side of him because of his impulsivity. These guys are going to end up potentially costing this company a lot of money. In a strange way, it's almost like Mattson is becoming this new sibling in this really, really toxic stew. So it was an interesting episode, because what you were seeing was the dysregulation that comes out of an unprocessed grief of a narcissistic, in this case, patriarch. And you can also see how Mattson has become almost this windmill that they can joust at. But you can also watch each of them, how their narcissism is sort of blossoming in all these directions. I got to tell you, it was a real joy to see Succession make its play on the streets of Los Angeles. So that sort of felt familiar and fun to know that perhaps Kendall would be splashing about in the Pacific Ocean, not too far away. So as always, it's such a pleasure. But this episode was bouncing a bit. It feels like a bridge to me. I think we're going to see some really interesting things happen as each of them sort of settles into their personality. But to me, and it's always been this, Roman is the dark horse where we're learning so much about vulnerable narcissism. But oh my, do I miss Logan. So stay tuned next week. I can't wait to watch it. And I hope you enjoyed this sort of narcissistic breakdown of this episode of Succession. Bye.